Oh, hey, Hoopheads. Welcome to the weekly Hoopla, where I get you caught up on all the need-to-knows of the NBA. Before I get started, I just want to thank you all again for watching. If you enjoy this content, please give it a thumbs up. It does help a lot more than you might think. But now that all that corporate crap's out of the way, let's get to it. All right, so we kind of knew that this week was just going to be a deadline day recap, and that's all I've really got for you. I don't care about the injuries. I think there's been a couple of things happen, but we can get all that caught up next week. Teams where they're at, all that good crap doesn't need to be done. Right now, we've got a big whopping, heaping, helping of trades that happen. So I'm going to start naturally with the place to start. Did I get anything right from last week? Simple answer is no. Simple answer is very much no, because essentially I was like, it's going to be quiet. I mean, there's a lot of first round picks tied up. There's a lot of people that maybe can make better moves in the offseason. You know, there just was a lot of reason to believe this wasn't going to be very eventful. And it felt like that. And then Wednesday, we got a couple little trinkles. And then Thursday, it was just an onslaught of deals. Kind of a range of whether they were impactful or not. And we'll debate all of that as I get into them. But definitely wrong on the quiet aspect. I will pat myself on the back here. I did predict that Houston's rumors were not about the current version of what they can do, but what they could do in the summer or next trade deadline. I also was kind of right about the Warriors and the Lakers, looking at their rosters and not finding real moves that would bring value to them getting this title. You know, I don't think there was a move for either team that 100% said this now puts you in contention for the 2024 title. I think what it did was allow both franchises to reassess what they are at the end of the season. And, you know, you still have enough core of previous title winners with both of them that you're like, whatever, maybe they still make a run if we could tailor this thing up. We will still mention both of these teams on a couple of minor transactions later on. You know, we always got to mention the Los Angeles Lakers that have LeBron James. That's just good for SEO. But either way. And then I did suggest the Mavs rob the Hornets. Now, I wouldn't say that they went as far as rob them, but we'll get to that. So that was kind of close. I was relatively close, but ultimately none of the trades I predicted really came that close to happening. So, you know, I tried to have fun with it. But I told you, probably not going to get any of these right. So now that that is out of the way, let's talk about trades. Boom, baby. The first one that I think came out, I don't remember which one of these dropped first on Wednesday, but we'll start with this one. The Utah Jazz send out Simone Fontecchio to the Detroit Pistons for a 24 second. That is Washington's pick, I believe. I've also seen something that said of Charlotte or Washington's. Either way, you're looking at a good second-round pick for next season. Kevin Knox, who they've cut, and the rights to Gabriele Procida, who is also an Italian man. So he's a 36th pick in a draft 2 years ago, almost 2 years ago. And there's been some things to like about him. He's an interesting prospect. It doesn't seem like he's just in this to make a deal. It seems like it's potential that they could still, we could still see Procida in the NBA at some point. Breaking down what it means for the teams, right? So Simone Fontecchio, I think, is a very interesting little piece. And honestly, now that we're kind of looking at it, and we'll get into all their moves later, but it feels like the Pistons kind of got a nice little upgrade for the future over Bojan Bogdanovic, who I think is a good player. But I think Fontecchio provides a very similar play style, but might even be a little bit more of what you're looking for on the defensive end. I mean, we'll see. He's a bigger guy. He's got a good athleticism. So you kind of want to – you don't think he has all the tools to do that. Detroit's probably still a while away from being a good defensive team, but at least it's another piece that feels like he could be building towards something real. I think that he's a guy who can have an impact on the game without taking the ball out of Ivy or Cunningham's hands. That's key. So, yeah, I think it's a pretty awesome price to have paid if I'm the Pistons. You don't need extra high seconds, especially in a draft that everyone's complaining about. So you might as well send that to Utah. Utah, you probably weren't going to keep him, which is a little weird on how Utah's building that roster. But, you know, ultimately you have redundancies. You should capitalize on them when you can. And like I said, this Gabriele Procida guy isn't exactly just a complete throwaway. I mean, there's still a possible world where he doesn't ever play basketball in the NBA, but I would say at this point it's probably more likely he will. And then at that point, maybe you get a better price for a guy that's similar enough to Fontecchio at a time where you're going to need him to be more cost controlled because of the other guys on your roster. So we'll see. Maybe this summer we'll have more light into that. But very simple trade here. Nothing too crazy. The Pistons just need NBA players. The Utah Jazz need to sort of start making decisions on theirs. And this was just one of those moves. Getting into the second move that had happened on Wednesday, I think there's three. Yeah, I think there's three total here that went down on Wednesday. Memphis sends out Xavier Tillman to the Boston Celtics for Lamar Stevens, a 27 second-round pick that's going to come from the Atlanta Hawks, and a 32nd-round pick that's going to come from the Dallas Mavericks. The picks-wise, those are really far out. They're also second-round picks, so it's nice. It's not nothing. Xavier Tillman is a useful NBA player. I think for the Celtics, this is a great value play. Cornette can kind of space the court for you, but I don't think he's a defensive presence. I think Xavier Tillman's a good defensive presence. So now if you get into an injury situation and you are down to just Cornette and Tillman, you have options. You have real options. And I think for a team trying to win a title, it was vital for them to get a big that fits into what they do. Obviously, you can still play KP at the 5, but realistically, we know that Horford, Cornette, and Xavier Tillman are going to be more suited for that so that KP can play the 4 where he would like to be. So that's kind of where I would look at that. Lamar Stevens was somebody I was really interested in to see if he would actually impact the Celtics this year. Didn't really fall into that. There's quite a cluster there of guys in that wing room that weren't too bad, that need a little run. So for Lamar Stevens, it's nice because he gets to go to a pretty bad Grizzlies team, or at least a very young Grizzlies team, an unhealthy Grizzlies team. And he gets to play some real basketball, I would think. He played pretty well in Cleveland the years before he went to Boston, so this would be a good opportunity for him to keep in the NBA long term, whereas in Boston, maybe you win a ring this year, but you're not doing a lot to keep yourself in the NBA. It's another very moderate trade. The Celtics will make another one down our rundown, but at this point, you just got to give Brad Stevens credit for understanding the market. I thought there was some other interesting backup bigs for them to get that I think they ended up not pulling a trigger on because of price. I think when you talk about what they got in terms of the deal, it was great. Moving into a pretty similar trade, I would consider the Detroit Pistons sending out Monte Morris to the Timberwolves for Troy Brown, Shake Milton, and a second from Minnesota 2030 second-round pick. This one is very similar, right? This is adding it's very similar, but it's a little different too. So I would say the Wolves are still hurrying for a true full playoff rotation. And Monte Morris is a perfect addition to this. You might have heard his nickname is Count of Monte Assisto. He is what I would like to call the assist to turnover god. If you don't know much about Monte Morris, his whole career since back in Iowa State, maybe even high school, he's just been one of the most insane assist to turnover ratio players in basketball. He's incredible at it. He's a small guy. He's not the most consistent shooter in the world. So you kind of see where, as an NBA player, his abilities have plateaued a little bit, but super, super useful guy. And backing up Mike Conley, playing on a roster that has so much defensive capabilities, I think Monte Morris is in a perfect spot, and I think the Wolves are going to thrive having that extra player. What they gave up wasn't a lot. Troy Brown, I think, was a solid guy, but I don't think he would have ever played in the playoffs seriously. And Shake Milton, essentially, who Monte Morris is replacing, who was a solid addition for them, but didn't quite give them what they were looking for in the reserve role because he is a little bit more of a combo, a little more of a 2. So Monte Morris, I think, fits a little more snugly. And, of course, extra picks for bad teams isn't a bad call. So for the Pistons, I think you get a couple of guys who are NBA-level players who are a little bit better than what you had on the roster for sure, but you're not necessarily getting into a log jam either. If you need to bench those guys this season, you can bench those guys this season, and you can still have the young guys play, whatever it is. And Monte Morris didn't play for you this season. He spent most of the first half of the year hurt. Came back about a couple weeks ago, maybe. And so obviously there's a little bit of a concern there if you're Minnesota, but given that he might have a little bit of a frustrating start to his tenure there, I would expect that to level out and then him be a very, very, very calming addition to what they have as they try to, legitimize themselves. I mean, the Timberwolves are in an interesting position because if they capitalize on this season and they establish themselves as here, they don't necessarily have to win a title, but they're a much more respectable group. If they flame out again, though, we could be talking about the team that everyone's trying to vulture when it comes to Karl-Anthony Towns, especially, right? I don't think there's any way you could get Anthony Edwards out of Minnesota. And if there was, then I'd be very, very worried about the future of Minnesota. Yeah, we'll move into the next day of trades where I don't even know if I don't know the order of what all happened on Thursday at this point, but we're just going to take it from this order. I wrote it down. One of the bigger trades that happened, arguably the biggest name moved, depending on how you view it. The Pacers sent out Buddy Hield to the 76ers. What they got in return was essentially just a bunch of picks because they got Furkan Korkmaz and they then flipped the Marcus Morris contracts from Philly. But neither of those guys are going to play for the rosters that they ended up on. At least we believe Marcus Morris will be cut. He hasn't officially. And then Furkan Korkmaz was cut already. So a 24 second-round pick and a 29 second-round pick from Portland are pretty much what you cash in on for the Pacers. That second-round pick is you got Toronto, Indiana, Utah, and Cleveland all have various conditions with that. So what actual pick that is, I'm not sure. And the 29 Portland, who knows? You also get some cash, right? Help you pay for the waiving. Then, like I said, the Pacers ended up really capitalizing in this trade by taking Marcus Morris's deal and the second-round pick. Essentially, I think this would turn into a 3-team trade. If it wasn't, then it was just the other way. It doesn't matter for our purposes today. A 29 second-round pick from the Clippers that Philly owned will now go to San Antonio. Doug McDermott will go to the Pacers. Return to the Pacers where he can add length, size, shooting, all that good stuff that I talked about with his projected trade to the Lakers in my last podcast. Just as good for the Pacers. I think this is a great way to do it. And, of course, the Pacers can also go about retaining him very easily next season without paying him as much because that's essentially what the Pacers did this deadline is they had extra cap space, but they had pretty much blown the load as much as I think they were willing to pay on Pascal Siakam. So instead of going for another big name or trying to add, really bolster this roster this season, I think they made the smarter move and they got rid of the asset they already knew they were going to get rid of to bring in a guy who probably replaces them essentially anyway in McDermott. And then you keep yourself kind of moving forward. You got more seconds, you've got more ammo moving forward, and you're more realistic about what this season is, where it's just a return to the playoffs. It's let's punch somebody in the mouth. We're not necessarily in the title contention window yet. We're close, maybe next year, but I think this year, realistically, the Pacers they're just a really good team potentially, and maybe even a conference finals team at best, but ultimately with no playoff experience on this roster as a group. Obviously, the coach has a lot of experience. Some of the players have a lot of experience, but realistically, this group has none. It's one of those things where you just kind of have to take it with a grain of salt. So the Sixers, Buddy Hield's a great addition to what they're doing. They have a lot of cap space in the next season. We don't know what Joel Embiid is going to be. We don't know how that's going to come back, what the real chances of the Sixers winning the title or competing for the title this year are. But we do know that this is a great player to add to the rotation around this thing, I think at least. And so Buddy Hield, they get a jump on keeping him in the offseason, as well as, taking a shot at whatever they get this season. One of the more curious trades here, and it read a little scarier when it came out than what it ended up being now that you can see their conditions at the bottom. But the Utah Jazz sent Kelly Olynyk and Ochai Agbaji to the Toronto Raptors for Kyra Lewis, Otto Porter, and a 24 first-round pick. That one came out pretty crazy because it was not the least valuable of Oklahoma City, the Clippers, Rockets, and Jazz, right? That wasn't exactly how it was portrayed to begin with. It felt like the Raptors had given up a full first-round pick for this thing, but it's not when you get into their conditions. It's really not that bad. But they did buy. It is interesting that they bought. Not interesting that the Jazz sent out Kelly Olynyk and Agbaji. Agbaji had come out really hot to start his career with Utah, but ultimately doesn't seem to be somebody who's going to stick around, or doesn't feel like someone who's 100% going to stick around. The good thing is for Toronto, he gets a better shot than he was in Utah, where his minutes were just kind of in and out all over the place. And Kelly Olynyk, I mean, he's a Canadian kid. He gets to come home. Actually, there's a funny joke with this. You get a Canadian and you get a kid whose dad's from Nigeria. So really, Masai Ujiri had a great trade deadline, if you ask him. That's two of his favorite things. So you end up having a couple interesting flyers for what I think isn't too bad of a price. Otto Porter wasn't going to matter to your team. He just didn't. Not that he was awful. There's injuries. There's a lot of crap going on. And Otto Porter just didn't play very well in your jersey. It's fine. Kira Lewis, I honestly kind of hope that Toronto would give him more of a run. I don't think he's going to get more of a run in Utah, so it's kind of like the writing's on the wall for the future of Kira Lewis at this point. You got to wonder what his next steps are going to be in the offseason. And then that first-round pick. If you're Utah, you just keep collecting assets at this point because, you're similar to the Pacers. You're similar to maybe even the Thunder a little bit, we'll talk about in a second, where you got a good core. You're not great by any, those other teams can be great, but you're specifically the Jazz, not very good, not great at least. And you have a lot of decisions to make about how you're going to form this thing moving forward. So having the optionality to build this thing out is pretty awesome. And of course, Trader Danny's always going to be on the hunt to upgrade and move. And that's just what Danny Ainge does. Boom. First, I think this one's a pretty big trade, actually. The Buddy Hield trade is obviously a big deal. I think that one I have a little bit more on than most people. But this trade, I think most people are pretty excited about from all angles, and especially after one game for one of these teams. I am glad I waited a couple of days to sit down and do this, because now we've kind of gotten to see these little bitty windows, and you can see a little more of excitement. And who knows how much of this is going to last long term, but this trade is a great one. Now, Gordon Hayward has not played for the Thunder yet. He probably won't play for the Thunder for a little bit. But the Hornets sent out Gordon Hayward to the Oklahoma City Thunder. And initially, when we first heard this, it was just like, I think, Trey Mann and Davis Bertans, or Trey Mann and Davis Bertans and picks, I think. Either way, we found out eventually that you have the 2 second-round picks. You have Davis Bertans, who is what it is, but he's at least better than some of the other guys they have on their roster. You have Trey Mann, who I think is a good flyer for a first-round pick who just wasn't getting playing time where he was. And then Vasilije Micic, who I am thrilled to have seen traded, frankly. And so are the Hornets fans, and probably so are the EuroLeague fans. It's probably so are the NBA fans once they realize this guy's really good. I respect the Thunder for maintaining assets the way they did with them and keeping it business. I respect the way he handled his business in Oklahoma City. But this dude is really good, man. He's really good. And I think that putting him under the SGA minutes and sort of what he was doing as a co-star there just wasn't getting the most out of him. And I think Charlotte is going to love him. And game one was a big, big, big win for the Hornets. Especially for giving up a guy that isn't interested in being there any longer. I think Gordon Hayward can go to Oklahoma City, probably find some sort of reasonable deal to finish his career out, and he can be the veteran that sort of helps this team try to achieve their goals. So I don't hate it for either side. It was, like I said, interesting when this trade was announced, because it was announced much less than what you see here in front of you. But once it all came out, it was like, damn, the Hornets might have fucking stolen this. I mean, the Thunder might have overpaid at this point. But, either way, we'll see how much Hayward impacts the Thunder and if they retain him long term, which I think they're very likely to do. And yes, I would be remiss not to make a little joke or two about how perfectly Gordon Hayward fits into Oklahoma City. But we're going to be nice to the Thunder, and we're going to be nice to Oklahoma. They're great fans. Regardless of their stereotypical politics. And let's jump into the next thing before I get myself in trouble. All right. The Philadelphia 76ers sent Danuel House in a second-round pick. That's the New York Knicks second-round pick in this year's draft, so probably not very good, and cash to the Detroit Pistons for a 28th second-round pick of Detroit's. I don't think there's protection on that, so that's kind of wild for Detroit in a way, because it's like you guys could still be pretty bad 4 years. But either way, not a big deal. Ultimately, second-round pick. If you give up the 31st overall pick, or in that, hell, by that point, the 33rd overall pick, because there'll probably be two more teams in the NBA. Yeah, it's not the end of the world. But it was essentially just to take on a player to cut him. So I guess they value that second-round pick in their pocket this year a little bit more than they value that second-round pick later on the road. Maybe there's some cap experts that can help you out a little bit. I know that for the Sixers, this was reported that, and I can't remember which of the beat guys did it, but essentially the tweet I saw was a lot of this was just to cut salary so that they could offer more in the buyout market, and we'll talk about who they signed with that money. So it was a good decision later on in the show. And then, like I said, you just get another pick here. It's a little weird because you give up another pick that maybe could end up being a better pick ultimately, but either way, it's so far down the road and you're building something now. Yeah, I guess you just take the extra swing at the bite of the apple, or you take the extra asset to maybe move up in the draft, whatever it is. Essentially, this is using your cap space to get assets. So we respect that. Excuse me. The Detroit Pistons are not done. So many Pistons moves, man. They had a whole new roster after Thursday at 3 p.m. Or 2 p.m. Central. The Detroit Pistons. They sent out, and I think this is the last deal we're going to mention the Pistons on. They sent out Bojan Bogdanovic and Alec Burks to the New York Knicks for Quentin Grimes. Sorry about that. Gotta love the grammar there. Evan Fournier, Ryan Arcidiacono, and Malachi Flynn. As far as the players go, they also got a 28 second-round pick and a 29 second-round pick, both of the New York Knicks. Probably not high in value at all, really. And I think there's a lot of people questioning things because Bojan Bogdanovic was allegedly multiple first-round picks just a year ago. But I think this is fair. I think while we like Bojan Bogdanovic in theory, I think there's a lot of reality to his game that's similar to the Zach LaVine issue, where it's like, I like this player, but the money and the defense thing is real. And if the cost doesn't match, then why is another team taking it on? And we kind of already saw that in game one, where Burks and Bogdanovic weren't awful, but they were a little bit net negatives for the Knicks. And they're going to have to sort of groom into this team. Of course, the team is missing two of their other stars, so it's really just a tough time right now for the Knicks to change up so much of their roster after such a good start to the season. But ultimately, I think these moves are getting you to a better spot competitively. You get Thibs-approved insurance at the guard spot with Alec Burks. They needed that. And then you get a bucket getter in Bojan Bogdanovic, who I think you can cover for defensively once Mitchell Robinson's healthy, once OG Anunoby's healthy, once Julius Randle's healthy. I think you have a group that can cover him defensively so that all you're getting is the positives, and you just pull him if he's chucking shots, And I think that's awesome for them. Quentin Grimes is a good pickup for the Pistons. Otherwise, Evan Fournier might be more useful right now because you don't have a lot of NBA players there. They cut Arcidiacono. I don't know what Malachi Flynn will do, but it'd be cool to see him actually get some run because he's not looked awful in his limited time in Toronto. Didn't really get any run at all while he was short stint with the Knicks. So I like the move for the Pistons. Essentially you could look at it as getting a first-round pick because I do think Quentin Grimes is an NBA player, and I think he could be a good asset to that team, especially with Ivy and Cunningham being such good driving kick players. I think that should be just fine for them. At least it's a good idea moving forward to have pieces like that. So you'll see some people comment that this is a trade that put the Pistons over the top, or the Knicks over the top, or put them in contention with the Celtics. I think I'm still a little iffy on that. Like, I like Alec Burks and Bojan Bogdanovic, but like there was a reason that they were losing a lot of games too. And so like I said, there's still so much health. There's so much that you're remixing on the fly with the Knicks right now. And while I'm impressed by it, that they keep rolling for better or for worse. Right now, it's not, I wouldn't call it rolling, but they're still moving forward. I would say that this is a good point. I would say this is as good of a point for the Knicks as possible. Of course, the most important part of this is they didn't give up a lot of their true blue assets. So if a star does come on the market, not only do you have contracts that sort of help you get to the next number for that for said player, but you also have the assets as far as picks and young players, whatever it may be, that you could offer somebody. And that's really why the Knicks have been such an interesting and dangerous team to consider as we've gone. And again, I'm not poo-pooing any moves the Knicks made. I'm just looking at it from a more realistic standpoint where I'm like, I'm excited that the Knicks are good too, and they're doing competent things. But like, there was reactions from the Knicks side and from this next team we're going to talk about. And I promise I'm not being biased here, so I don't give a shit, right? Like, this is the team I rep, you know, regardless of where I'm from, regardless of that, you know, that doesn't matter either. I'm not a Spurs fan. I just have that, you know. I'm not a Cavs fan. I just have that. I'm not a Celtics fan. I just have that. There's a lot of other guys here. We're not going to go through all that. But either way, it's just one of those things where the public reaction initially doesn't always matter. I know I got a couple of days to watch everyone react, and maybe even and I got to see a couple of basketball games of these new players on their new teams. So perhaps that gives me the advantage in reacting. But at the same time, like, it's just incredible the agendas that get thrown out here, and it feels more and more like, you know, kind of what we were talking about, the Donovan Mitchell Laker rumors that are coming out of nowhere, where we're just forcing old NBA talk into current NBA times when they don't apply. But long story short, Knicks, you did a good job. I'm not giving you A++++++++. I'm giving you A because you got good players and you didn't give up a lot. But I don't think that this exactly puts you in Boston's category. I don't think it puts you in Denver's category. I don't think this puts you in. So I think there's still flaws on this team. But it's a fun team. They're going to hit you with a lot of talent, and they're going to hit you with a lot of Thibs grinders, you know. So for making a Tom Thibodeau team, they really capitalized and built as good of one as you could possibly put together. They could have got Bruce Brown into this group somehow. It would have been. But moving forward, we're going to jump into the local team for me here in DFW. The Dallas Mavericks. The Washington Wizards sent Daniel Gafford to the Mavericks for Richaun Holmes, and the Mavericks sent a 28 first-round pick to the Thunder. It's a pick swap, I should say. I didn't write that correctly on the screen, but that's what it is. The Thunder then send their 21st, one of their many 24 first-round picks. In fact, the second worst of that. Some of that Houston, Utah, LAC, Oklahoma City mix that we talked about on another trade up here. What was it? The Toronto trade. So an interesting trade for a couple of reasons. So this was the first of two Mavericks moves we'll talk about. And this one happened in a peculiar way, because this one happened where essentially we knew it was over. We knew it was Holmes for Gafford, contractually, financially. But what was confusing was what the Mavericks were giving up. Initially, it was essentially the report came out where the Mavericks are just going to give up something. We don't know. Essentially, it seemed like the Mavericks made and consummated a trade that they could not pay for. Very confusing. But okay, we knew they had some young players they wanted to try to move. You know, maybe it's just a couple seconds, whatever it is, right? So then the next trade gets announced, and we'll get to that one, but we're not going to step on that just yet. And 2 second-round picks are involved. So now my brain, mini brains, oh, those 2 second-round picks are going for Gafford. That's awesome. That's a great play. Not exactly. We find out, I think, about a couple hours later that it's actually the Mavericks have incentivized the Thunder to give them one of their first-round picks by swapping the rights in 2028. Essentially, this gives the Thunder, who have too many picks for what they can actually select this year, this allows them to have the odds at a better pick, banking on the Mavericks going kablooey by 2028. Fair, you know, from their standpoint, fair. From the reaction of the general public, I'm questioning it. But from the Thunder, I get where you're going to bank on this because you have what's the better option here. You might as well gamble on a team blowing up. Doesn't matter how possible it is. So they do that. The Mavericks take this first-round pick, and then they send that off for Gafford. So just taking that aspect on its own, it's a little bit of an overpay, admittedly. Just a little bit, because really this hamstrings the Mavericks' abilities to make bigger plays with all the first-round picks and all the stuff. But realistically, and we've seen this with other teams, there's a lot of creative ways you can go. And like I said, they did redeem more picks in that other trade we'll talk about. So it's not like they completely are asset poor. It's also important to remember that if this thing was to explode, if the Mavericks were to spontaneously combust, I don't care. You name the drama and it happens. And the whole team can't deal with each other. We're talking, if you're a Dallas fan, this is old school, but the Triple J Ranch Part 2. Like, what happens here, right? Well, we already heard rumors about Kyrie going for 3 first-round picks from the Lakers. I mean, look, that's not something I'm interested in doing at this point, but if shit goes downhill, sure, I'll take the Lakers picks. Duh. I could reimagine this thing with just losing Luka or just losing Kyrie and gaining assets. I can reimagine that on the fly. I would also say, worst case scenario, Luka leaves or wants to leave. He's not turning down $100 million extra to sign in free agency somewhere. I just doubt it. Like, I know he's not the worst. Like, I know he doesn't have a whole family thing to support. I know his dad was a player. I know he's not someone who necessarily needs a lot of the money, maybe, but or all the money. But I find it very hard to believe that someone would make that conscious decision when the modern NBA so sets up for you to sign your deal and then force out, right? So as long as the Mavericks don't hold on too long or live in denial, which Mavs fans I get is a consistent issue for this team. If they don't do that, they can be proactive, and then all of a sudden, all of these picks you don't have, you might double by getting rid of Luka and Kyrie in a worst case scenario. So please stop listening to all this asset management crap, because this doesn't compute. This isn't the 2008 Cleveland Cavaliers. It's not. It's a different NBA. Stop using these LeBron things. All of that stuff doesn't apply to Luka. It doesn't apply to the Mavericks. It doesn't apply to 2024 basketball. I'm off the soapbox though. Back into away from the picks, the player. I love Daniel Gafford. He's not perfect. He's not probably even a everyday starting center. Or if he is, you're probably talking about, a second, third tier level guy. That's unfortunately why the Bulls and the Wizards, who've had him before, have struggled, or that he hasn't made quite enough of an impact as far as the rebounding, the rim protection, the scoring, all of that stuff that the bigs are supposed to do. Gafford has done well, but not at a high elite level as a starter, right? Even a Jakob Poeltl is who I would liken him to, right? Jakob Poeltl is not an all-star. He's not probably an NBA Hall of Famer at any point in his career. But he's a really good starting center. And he's probably going to be a really good starting center for a very long time. I don't think that's the same thing about Daniel Gafford. Here's the good news. Mavericks already have that guy. Derek Lively is a really good player. I don't know if he's a Hall of Famer. I don't know if he's even an all-star level player. But that kid is really good. Really, really good. Really good athleticism. And the communication for a 19-year-old is absolutely notable. It's absolutely notable. But at the same time, the injuries have been a little bit of an issue this season. You're wearing him a lot too. You don't necessarily love that. So this was such a great pick. You need 48 minutes of center play. Maximum Kleba, you've done a great job. Dwight Powell, where's the Dwight Powell bobblehead? Where is he at? I got to pull him out. I got to pull out Dwight. Dwight Powell, you've done well for this franchise, for this city. I appreciate you. I'm not a Mavs fan, but I appreciate you. You're a good person in this city. It's time to be on the bench forever. Assistant coach, right? Next year, you can actually, you can Udonis Haslem the next 2 or 3 years. But then assistant coach, go join the Legends, whatever you got to do. We respect and love you, Dwight Powell, but this is about winning titles. All right. Jumping off of all that. Who else? Yeah, there's not much else angles talk about this. Richaun Holmes, I thought that a part of why I think the Mavericks had to spend a little bit extra to get this deal done is because they do have to deal with Holmes' contract again next year. I know you're saying, oh, well, they need NBA players. They're shitty anyway. And I agree. But at the same time, that is still money they have to take on that they could have used for something else. So you do sort of have to incentivize with that. And it was a part of what I talked about if the Mavericks made a move for Kyle Kuzma, right, is what what financially do you send back? So I think the best news is Gafford on a controllable salary fits so well. And of course, spoiler alert, I already watched game 1 yesterday. It was awesome. It was so much fun. And I don't know that it'll always be that fun. It'd be hard to top what they did Saturday night or Saturday during the day. But at the same time, the Mavericks have got themselves into a much more competitive position. And I think the Wonder Boy, I think Kyrie, I think they're both going to appreciate that a lot. And once we talk about our second move, we'll talk about how legitimately I think the Mavericks actually might be. But we got to talk about a former Maverick and a guy who was almost a Maverick again. And a really weird trade, if I'm being honest. And this isn't it. So I think I said we were done with the Raptors. There was another Raptor move. The Raptors, similar to a trade. Actually, this is going to be the 2 annoying guy trades, is what I would call it. So Dennis Schroeder, I think he's a good player. I think you saw him win the fucking FIBA World Cup, basically on just the spite and anger of what's happened to his NBA career and a good German team. Let's be fair. But really on the back of Dennis Schroeder. And he's got such great talent, but man, it's clear that he's just an asshole or something, right? Like, it's just clear that the people cannot like this guy. Like, it is like he is struggling. I mean, you almost had a third Lakers stint going on here. You might still get a third Lakers stint by the time it's all done. And that's really just scraping the bottom of the barrel if the Lakers keep calling you back. It's like they're not concerned with your behavior. Like, they got Christian Wood. They won a title with Dwight Howard after they already broke up with him ugly. Like, that's pretty much the only team messy enough to take on messy players like this consistently. And funny enough, Spencer Dinwiddie looking pretty messy too at the end of his Nets career. So he gets moved to the Raptors. Thad Young and Dennis Schroeder get sent over to the Nets. Thad Young and Spencer Dinwiddie are both cut. The Raptors avoid paying some money to do it. I'm sure likewise with the Nets. And that's also just roster spot thing. Thad Young probably better off signing with a true playoff contender if he wants to do that as his career's winding down. But the funny part is, honestly, Dennis Schroeder's already played well in Brooklyn. And it kind of looks like he's a good partner with Nick Claxton. You saw him and Anthony Davis have a lot of good chemistry. Like, I tell you, like, Dennis Schroeder is a good basketball player for so much of his time, but then it just turns and it's so consistent. And with a guy like that, it is what it is. I mean, the Nets needed guards. I respect that, and I don't hate the pick for them and for that reason, or for the trade for them. But just an interesting one. And then annoying guy trade number 2, and to finish our Mavericks conversation, the Charlotte Hornets sent PJ Washington to the Dallas Mavericks. They also sent 2 second-round picks, a 24 Charlotte second-rounder and a 28 second-rounder in Charlotte. Now, it's great because Charlotte sucks, so that's good value there. At least the 24 pick, that's good. This year, you could use that to even maybe draft Bronny James. I don't know. I just said it, Mavs fans. I just said it. You do with that what you will. The Mavs, they send Grant Williams, Seth Curry, and a 27 first round pick that is lightly protected, and I mean lightly as in top 2 only, which is basically to do it. But either way, like I said, they get the extra picks, so it makes it more palatable. We talked about the first round picks and how tied up the Mavericks are at this point, but how now with PJ, with Gafford, with a healthy Lively, this is the first time the Mavs have had a real roster, like a real NBA roster that's very deep. Like, I know they went on that conference title run or the conference finals run, but that was, we've seen Portland do that. Hell, I mean, look, Mavs fans, we saw the Lakers do it last year. I mean, all they did was just basically cut Russell Westbrook's salary into like three mediocre players, and then stayed healthy and got some good matchups along the way. And then, they eventually just got put in their place by a better team. It's making a conference finals is nice, but it's not true contention. Don't mistake it for true contention. It's not always true contention. But now I do think this is a roster that can do that. This is 48 minutes of real NBA players around Luka and Kyrie. That's going to pay dividends, even if they're mediocre guys. Even if a guy like PJ Washington's going to have some stuff about his game that you don't love, his job is so much simpler now. And I think that he's going to work. You already see the size difference with the Mavericks. You saw PJ Washington, Maximum Kleber front court last night or yesterday, and it didn't look awful. I don't love that moving forward. When you have Lively and Gafford, you don't want to see that, but it's like, hey, even this lineup's kind of pretty decent. Like, it's long, it's not the best in the world. Like, I would be terrified to play true, I would be terrified to play the Clippers, the Lakers, anybody that can drive to the basket relentlessly. I would be still pretty afraid with that duo. But if you need it to move into small ball, if you need to take Lively and Gafford out of the game for shooting, I think that's not an awful look. I don't think it's an awful look. So, like I said, the Mavericks get better. They get into a better position. PJ's also a controlled salary. So, I'm pretty excited about the Mavericks stuff. And that was before they had this big win yesterday. So, I think that people have had a very, very negative reaction to some of this stuff, and it's fine. I think that the desire to see superstars move markets or whatever is very strong. I think, but I just don't think the writing's on the wall in Dallas. I think that this is a very competent move, and I think this is going to be one of the first chances the Mavericks get of realizing the true potential of Luka Doncic. And I wouldn't be surprised if this team makes some serious noise. This is good enough. This is good enough for Luka and Kyrie to do some deadlifting. I don't know if it's a title winner. I don't think it puts you with Boston and Denver, but it puts you really close. And you happen to have a guy and two guys that maybe even can throw you over the top when they're at their best. So I got to give credit to Mavericks. I think they've done well, and they've retained young players too. So they still have moves to make in the offseason. I think they still have some interesting things that they can do to make this team a true blue contender for next year's title. Getting down over into the next trade here. This one's a big one. So I gave you guys like a summarized version there. I thought this said D-Lop, and it's just Diop. It doesn't give you a good. That I looks pretty tough on the font there. But the Nets sent Royce O'Neal to the Phoenix Suns. In return, they got Jordan Goodwin, Keita Bates-Diop, and a 3-second picks. This is the 26th second-round pick from Milwaukee, Orlando, or Detroit. Is a 28th second-round pick from Memphis and a 29th second-round pick from Memphis. The Grizzlies in this move off of David Roddy and bring in the rights to a guy who I think most likely will never play basketball in the NBA. And then they also got a pick swap from Phoenix out of the deal, a 26 first-round pick swap. If most likely that's not going to mean shit. No offense. Maybe it does, I guess. Actually, Memphis could be back as soon as next year. Phoenix could explode quickly. And then Yuta Watanabe and Chimezie Metu would go to the Grizzlies at this point. Yeah, they're going to the Grizzlies. Jordan Goodwin, Chimezie Metu already cut. It looks like Keita Bates-Diop and Yuta Watanabe will still play for their respective teams. Royce O'Neal, obviously, I think adds a very important piece to what they don't have in Phoenix, though I've heard people say this is their slam dunk move to win the title, and I still don't know how this team stops people. And we saw it last night where the Warriors they're getting better, but you're not stopping people. You got your number one starting center is trying to revitalize beef with Draymond and then bitch about it when Draymond actually gets him in a fair, legal way. Didn't punch him in the face this time. So Yusuf Nurkic always bothered me on this roster. I get the offensive side of it, but just bothers me. The Nets cashed in on at least one person, so good for them. It was a weird deadline for them. They decided to keep this team pretty much as is, if not kind of buy into it a little bit with Schroeder. The Grizzlies, they move on from David Roddy. They've got a lot of projects in the project house there that probably need to be moved on from. David Roddy was a solid one, but not a great one. So, hey, Phoenix, you need extra wing help. Boom, let's do it. And as far as the buyout stuff, I think there's a couple interesting guys on the buyout market now of this deal. Keita Bates-Diop probably helps the Nets a little bit, gives them more size and length. And then Yuta Watanabe should get minutes to at least keep his NBA career thriving, because Memphis is going to need some guys to end this season on some sort of a high note. I mean, they're still playing really well, even if they're going to start dropping games pretty hard because they're just they're decimated. Like, it just doesn't get more decimated than Memphis, historically even. But either way, not here to talk about Memphis at all anymore, actually, I think. Because we're pretty much done. We're just now down to the goofy little moves, the interesting moves, but the more inconsequential, with all due respect to these players. Now, this one's debatable, but the Philadelphia 76ers sent Patrick Beverley to the Bucks for Cam Payne and a 27th second-round pick. Okay, so, like, let me just start. For the Sixers, I respect it. Because I've been having this conversation about Pat Beverley for a fucking decade, and I'm tired of it. I'm just not. I'm not going to continue. He's a solid player, but he's so loud, and he's so vocal, and he's so wrong all the time. It's just like, I'm glad you're a part of Barstool Sports. So that's why you're just muted forever, Pat Bev. Such lowbrow content, bro. Like, you're going to tell me that you weren't the problem in LA, but then this team cut you, and now you're going to go play for a dude who you made fun of multiple times right before your team embarrassed itself on the biggest stage. You know what I mean? Like, I don't like fake tough guys in the NBA. I don't like guys who talk more than they produce. It doesn't work in basketball the way it works in other sports. And I don't think Pat Beverley, he's done a lot. He's had a lot of opportunity with Philly, and he played well. It was a little surprising. It's not as surprising because they did replace him. We'll get to that. But it's just one of those things where I honestly probably would have wanted more Cam. I probably would have taken the gamble on Cam Payne a little bit. But best case scenario, Pat Beverley can hit some shots a little bit more consistently than Cam Payne. I feel like he also probably runs the offense a little cleaner than Cam Payne. So I'll give Pat Bev that credit. Don't want to pretend like I'm just shitting on Pat Bev, even though I don't mind it either. And then, I think that the Sixers were, they always knew that there was a bigger buyout candidate for that position. And once the candidate got to the team, we'll talk about that guy, it was obvious that Pat Beverley wasn't going to be a part of the rotation. And then you kind of worry about what else that could bring. So I think in that sense, it was a very smart move for the Sixers to go ahead and just admit that it's probably an ideal that made sense for either team to move forward with on the season, even though he really did play well. Next move, another financial transaction, so it won't take us too long to talk about this one. The Bucks sent Robin Lopez and Moolah to the Sacramento Kings for the draft rights to a guy who was drafted 59th overall in 2015. So I think you can go ahead and bank on that man not playing in the NBA. And of course, this is the Bucks trying to skirt a little salary tax. When you have as much players they do, it makes sense. It's not like Robin Lopez was putting you over the top. Might as well save money so that you can keep pumping money into this roster as it goes. What they end up doing on the buyout market will be interesting, because that's essentially what you're doing here is you're sort of setting yourself up for a buyout market play, but not one that they made just yet. So not much to talk about here. We did get a funny video of Robin Lopez reading a book at the Bucks game after being traded. So I just appreciate how the Lopezes take everything in stride. Really funny dudes. Philadelphia. We're back. Jaden Springer had gotten some minutes here in the last month or so. Looked really nice defensively. Looked pretty behind the eight ball offensively. So eventually he gets moved to the Celtics. This is another little minor move for the Celtics on paper where they just give up their second-round pick. It's probably as worthless as anything. The Sixers just get another asset because it's kind of what they're doing at this point. I mean, they're really making whatever play they can make in the offseason. Sixers weren't thinking Jaden Springer was ready for the role that he was going to be given. The Celtics, they have no problem with that because he's a talented, young, controllable player, and they don't need him to step up this season like the Sixers do. So nothing too crazy to talk about here. I think the Celtics could have maybe just got a really sick value, though, for a guy as they could move on in the future, as they may have to move on from some guys. I think Jaden Springer could be an interesting player to groom and to have for whatever the next maybe post-Drew Holiday version of them is. But at this point, I really like the move. Very simple move. And I also like this from the Celtics. Delano Banton is essentially moved to the Blazers for a protected second-round pick, and I never got the details on that, so I'm guessing that's probably not conveying. For the Blazers, this is a warm body. He already had a nice little start to his Blazers tenure. And for the Celtics, I think you're giving a guy a shot to play somewhere where he looks decent. He's looked good in Toronto. He looked good in Boston in small amounts. And you give him a shot to actually play basketball and maybe have an NBA career where he just wasn't going to be able to do that with your team. And then you take on, not in the same transaction, but essentially because of the Jaden Springer trade, you have a replacement for him on the bench and a guy who probably fits more salary-wise for the future and fits more for an upside play, where Delano Banton, we just don't know what that guy is. And I think for him, it's probably better to go to a team that doesn't have any aspirations of winning things this year and getting his grounds and legs under him. Moving into our final trade, our very final boring trade. Sorry, maybe you should have tiered this to where it was more fun, but by the time you've already gotten here, you already got through most for the fun part. So here you stay for the Corey Joseph trade, right? That's what we all do. The Warriors' big move was to basically make sure that Steve Kerr couldn't play Corey Joseph anymore. They traded him a 2025 Charlotte second-round pick and Cash Ola for a 24 second-round pick in Indiana this year. Indiana's pick probably not going to be super sick either. That second-round pick, whatever. We've talked about that quite a bit already in the show, so you kind of get how I feel about the 24 seconds. It's like it's nice to have them, but also everyone's poo-pooing this draft. So you needed assets, though, because they're still recouping a lot. And again, you give Steve Kerr less veteran crutches and you trust young players, and maybe that's a better thing for the Golden State Warriors in 2025, even if it's punting 2024 a little bit. And then for the Pacers, like I said, you just continue to use your cap space to collect assets, and that's really smart. I mean, you're a really talented group. You're young relatively, and you've got a lot of moves to make in the future to maybe take yourself up another level. So I am actually really, really impressed by the Pacers for not doubling down on this season, and maybe I guess Bruce Brown would have been an option, but finding these more win now type guys that were on the market and going gung ho into this season, thinking that you have a real shot at the 2024 title, and maybe you do, but it's only if this, and this happens. It's not based off of your team being that level of talent, in my opinion. But all right, so that's the boring crap. Now let's talk about the buyouts before we wrap this whole thing up. Notable buyout guys: Joe Harris. The age is a problem here. The athleticism is an issue here. But the shooting, if it can be consistent, I'm sure there's a roster that can have him. Harry Giles, it's probably over for his NBA career, sadly. Killian Hayes, he may have to wait till the offseason to find a new home, but I don't think his NBA career is quite over yet. Danuel House, an interesting role player, but probably not one people are going to be breaking their necks over. Ryan Arcidiacono, same thing. He kind of felt like a guy who wasn't going to be in the NBA again, except for Tom Thibodeau really liked him. Victor Oladipo, I mean, you're talking about a guy who could have been Hall of Fame level player whose injuries have just messed him up a ton. I'm sure plenty of people think Miami will go after him if he's available and healthy. We'll see. Corey Joseph, who I just talked about, is an interesting prospect or an interesting veteran to bring in, but essentially what is that adding? Similar to Thaddeus Young, unless you absolutely need that position, have a need at that position. I don't know that that's anything more than veteran leadership. James Bouknight, that's an interesting young player to take. Obviously, we didn't really talk about it here with the Hornets, but they ended up cutting Kai Jones and James Bouknight this season and basically wiping out their 2021 draft entirely. Which is tough. And it's why when you get trades for Trey Mann, Davis Bertans, and Vasily Micic, even though Micic is a hell of a player, you see an uptick in the fans in the game because they just had that few NBA players on their roster. And it's unfortunate, but it's true. And Bouknight, he's gotten into some trouble. It's not just been bad play. So it'll be interesting. I would be surprised if no one took a chance on him, or at least maybe it's a G League situation, but we'll see. Furkan Korkmaz, someone who probably is I think of the available guys, is probably the one I would go after the most. We've made jokes about him trying to get traded out of Philly for a while. He was always buried under rotation there, despite whoever was coaching. But I always thought Furkan Korkmaz really performed well when he was given opportunities. And I think that says a lot. I don't know how much he really changes your trajectory, obviously, but there's a lot of teams I think should end up calling Korkmaz, especially if you're in the Joe Harris market, if you're considering Danuel House, who I'll mention now. But he'll be in the second part of this. Too many buyout guys to fit in one graphic here. Chimezie Metu is an interesting prospect. We'll get to him in the next one. Sorry, I need to look at this one, not my notes. Jordan Goodwin, interesting defensive player, looked really nice in Washington. Thought he would be a part of the Phoenix thing when the Bradley Beal trade happened. People were like, "Oh, this is really, really cool little piece that they got." And then now he just didn't end up in rotation because of all the guards they have, and now he's just a free agent. So that's a potential big win for somebody if he gets more of an opportunity and revitalizes what we saw. Ish Smith obviously helped win a title last year in Denver. Wouldn't be surprised if Denver calls him up, depending on their roster situation. But maybe some other teams would also like to have his veteran presence. Then you have our final guys. You have, like I said, Danuel House. I'm sure he will get plenty of interest from other teams. Chimezie Metu, kind of a big guy who can stretch the floor. Probably can't play in the postseason, but for the regular season, an interesting guy to bring in. Frank Ntilikina. Probably towards the end of his NBA tenure at this point. Charlotte had kind of given him a good run there, but probably time for Frankie Smokes to head back overseas, if I'm being honest. Kevin Knox, every time we thought he's dead, he's come back. So I'm assuming the Pistons will re-sign him in the offseason. And then Marcus Morris, not officially a buyout candidate, but seems very likely. And Niffles, it seems like you guys might be the ones taking the hold to Marcus Morris, although, I guess the buyout rules probably take a lot of the big teams away, so that really helps the Mavs a lot too. So, yeah, and obviously having Markieff already on the roster helps. So Marcus Morris probably one of the other guys that I would look at as one of the big names on the buyout market. Going in, I don't love Marcus Morris for a lot of reasons, but when he's at a vet minimum deal or at a very, salary-friendly, team-friendly deal, I don't hate it. And when he's playing in a system with a coach that's not afraid to pull him when he's stopping and messing up the offense, I really like him because he's useful in small doses, and he would help them with size and athleticism, help anybody with size and athleticism. So not an awful candidate. I know there's going to be a little bit of pause there, but I'm sure that once he's officially bought out, that he will be coveted. And then we did have two buyout guys already make their deals official. So Spencer Dinwiddie and Kyle Lowry, both, I guess, the point guards, two of the guys who would have been the bigger names in this free agent market, already off the board. Spencer Dinwiddie had to choose between the Mavs and the Lakers. Ended up choosing the Lakers for a couple of reasons, in my opinion. You have to remember he did sign a contract with part of it giving him crypto, which did not do particularly well. So probably recouping some funds from the last deal. They were able to pay him more because they didn't give Gabe Vincent his full money in off season. So it did allow them to pay more than the Mavericks, which probably offset the taxes. And then finally, the most important part of this, he had a little bit of a bigger opportunity in LA. Now, I've already seen Mavs fans that were pissed off because they feel spurned, and now they're shitting on the Lakers and who can you close in this lineup? How do you do it? Oh, the Mavericks were so perfect. So I'm sorry, Mavs. I've given you so much love today. I have to give you some shit too. That was some crybaby shit, especially for Spencer Dinwiddie. Like, you guys have Dante Exum. I'd rather have Exum for what I'm doing in Dallas than Spencer. But if Exum was hurt, then obviously I'd like the Dinwiddie thing. Either way, what the Lakers are betting on here is that they don't have two guards they can close with, that they don't even really have one good guard they can close with. Austin Reeves is really good offensively, but frustrating defensively. Same thing with D'Angelo Russell. So Spencer Dinwiddie, in theory, gives you a longer player with a longer track record of having to actually guard some of the best players in the league. Whether he's the greatest at that or not is debatable, but it has been his assignment. So I would say that the Lakers are bringing Dinwiddie in because this gives them 3 options of a guard that they can close with on their big lineups, where you have Davis, LeBron, maybe Vanderbilt, depending on where his health is, maybe Cam Reddish, depending on his health and playing and how well he's playing, maybe Taurean Prince, whatever, right? I think the Lakers want to play 4 bigger people, Rui Hachimura, whatever. They want to play 4 bigger guys and then have that guard be just whatever guy is hot and whatever guy they can trust defensively. And the good thing is it's already worked really well with D'Angelo and with Reeves because they both sort of understand they can't both close. So they both have been sort of taking on the take it on the chin attitude when it comes to being benched in the closing minutes. Adding a 3rd player to that could get contentious, especially Dinwiddie with the history of being contentious. But we'll see how that goes. And then Kyle Lowry gets to go home. Kyle Lowry gets to go play for Philadelphia. This has been rumored for a while, so it was not a surprise at all that it was almost immediately after we found out that he was finally waived by the Hornets that he's now officially a Sixer. That's a great move for them as a value play, as an energy for the city. I think he'll end up being really good for them. Again, I don't know what this means for this season, but it seems like Lowry still probably could play for another year, I think, right? So at least you bring him in now and you probably re-sign him for whatever team-friendly deal for another 1 season or so, however much he really wants to play. And you've got a good reserve guard and somebody who can play with Maxey, because I do think Maxey's a good combo guard. So, yeah, that's pretty much it, man. We got here. We're here. Thank you guys again for watching. The Super Bowl's happening tonight. I'm going to post this whenever I post this. And if the Super Bowl eats up our views, I just don't know what to say to you. But I'll probably still tag a bunch of crap in here. So thank you guys again for watching the Hoopla. Like, share, subscribe, whatever you can. If I release this in time, show this at your Super Bowl party. When Usher comes on, don't put on Usher. Put this on. Why not?